Johnson Outboards once meant everything that boating could be: reliable, ingenious, and so trusted that fishermen paid premium prices for engines built decades earlier. Their die-cast aluminum designs revolutionized marine propulsion in 1922, and by mid-century, they were America's best-selling outboard, celebrated for bulletproof dependability. But in a single decade, the name vanished, erased not by obsolescence, but by ruthless corporate infighting, disastrous engineering gambles, and a boardroom decision shrouded in secrecy. The official story says Johnson simply couldn't compete. But what if the real reasons behind the disappearance of Johnson Outboards were buried deeper, with consequences that still ripple through marinas and memories today? Terre Haute, Indiana, 1903. Four brothers, Lou, Harry, Clarence, and Willie Johnson, set out to solve a simple problem: how to make engines that worked every time, no matter what the river threw at them. Their workshop was small, but their ambitions weren't. Early experiments with inboard marine and airplane engines taught them a lesson that would echo for decades: reliability mattered more than flash. The real breakthrough came in 1922. Johnson's light twin outboard, weighing just 35 pounds thanks to die-cast aluminum, changed everything. Boaters who once struggled with heavy, cantankerous motors found themselves lifting these new engines with one hand and starting them with the other. It wasn't just lighter, it was immune to corrosion, easier to repair, and nearly impossible to kill. That single model didn't just win races. It won over a nation of fishermen and explorers who needed engines they could trust miles from shore. By the mid-1920s, Johnson had overtaken Evinrude in sales, a feat that stunned the industry. The company's reputation for bulletproof dependability wasn't a slogan. It was the lived experience of their river guides, rescue crews, and weekend boaters who counted on their engine to get home. The workforce grew, and so did the legend. Each year brought new models, but the core promise never changed: build engines that worked, period. In 1952, Johnson celebrated its millionth outboard. That number wasn't just a milestone, it was a declaration. The Johnson name had become shorthand for reliability, stamped into the metal of every engine and etched into the memories of those who relied on them. Before the era of corporate rivalry and technological arms races, Johnson's early years set a standard the rest of the industry could only chase. The roots of the brand's dependability ran deep, forged in aluminum and tested on water across America. The 1990s and early 2000s represented the absolute pinnacle of Johnson's engineering mastery. During these years, the outboard world saw what many still call the finest two-stroke engines ever built. The Fast Strike series, with its loop-charged two-stroke technology, could rocket a bass boat onto plane in seconds and idle for hours without a hiccup. Owners marveled at engines that shrugged off low-octane fuel, ran wide open all day, and still started on the first pull after months in storage. Loop-charged two-stroke design was the secret weapon. Instead of letting fresh fuel shoot straight out the exhaust like older cross-flow engines, Johnson's loop charging swept the air-fuel mixture upward, swirling it across the cylinder crown and forcing spent gases out with surgical precision. The result? More power, better economy, and cleaner combustion. Mechanics praised the simplicity: fewer moving parts, fewer points of failure, and a burn so clean that spark plugs stayed pristine for entire seasons. Guides and rescue crews trusted these engines where failure wasn't an option. Then came the Ocean Pro models, built for saltwater brutality. Military-grade corrosion protection, overbuilt cooling systems, and gear cases that could take a pounding in rocky shallows. These engines weren't just tough, they were legendary. Some racked up thousands of hours without a single major rebuild, earning a reputation as the outboard that could outlast the boat itself. And at the top of the mountain stood the 300 V8. 8 cylinders, 300 horsepower, a mechanical marvel that redefined what was possible on the water. It wasn't just about speed, it was about confidence. Owners called it the King of the Dock, a badge of honor for anyone who needed unstoppable power offshore. Everywhere you looked, Johnson owners spoke with a kind of reverence. Restoration forums overflowed with stories of engines that refused to die, of fathers passing down outboards to their kids, of rescue missions completed because a Johnson never quit. That devotion created a community, one that believed reliability wasn't just a feature, it was a promise engraved in metal. Yet that very excellence would soon put them in the crosshairs of regulators and corporate strategists. Inside Outboard Marine Corporation, rivalry wasn't just a marketing slogan, it was the operating system. After the 1935 merger, Johnson and Evinrude became siblings in name only. Each division guarded its turf, building separate engineering teams, sales forces, and even parallel manufacturing lines. Annual reports from the 1980s quietly acknowledged the cost of this split, but the boardroom clung to the idea that two brands meant twice the market share. In reality, it meant twice the overhead and half the speed. Every year, Johnson and Evinrude released engines that looked different on the outside, but shared nearly identical guts. Engineers worked on duplicate projects, sometimes launching near clones of each other's motors within months. Instead of pooling resources to leap ahead of Mercury or Yamaha, OMC split its research and development budget, funding two versions of the same solution. The result? Innovation dollars thinned out and the technical edge dulled. As one former executive put it, we were our own biggest competitor. Dealers bore the brunt of this internal arms race. Showrooms were packed with Johnsons and Evinrudes that shared parts, price points, and performance specs, but came with conflicting incentives and sales pitches. Some dealers got caught in bidding wars for the same customer, forced to discount one brand to move the other. Others watched as confused buyers walked out, unsure why two badges offered the same engine in different colors. Trade journals from the 1990s are filled with complaints about cannibalized sales and eroded margins. Inside the company, the rivalry bred suspicion and protectionism. Managers swapped between divisions, but loyalty rarely followed. Engineers, wary of giving away an edge, sometimes withheld technical fixes or delayed sharing new developments. The culture of warring tribes slowed the adoption of new technologies and left both brands vulnerable when the industry began to shift. By the late 1990s, what started as healthy competition had calcified into a structural weakness. OMC's dual-brand fortress, once a symbol of market dominance, had become a maze of duplicated effort and wasted potential. The cost of clinging to two identities was about to come due. The gamble began in a boardroom, not a laboratory. By the mid-1990s, OMC was desperate for a miracle. Rivals were rolling out four-stroke engines that sipped fuel and met looming EPA standards, while Johnson and Evinrude clung to two-stroke tradition. Then came the promise: Ficht direct injection technology, developed by Wolfgang Heimberg in Germany. OMC paid dearly for the patents, betting everything on a leap past Mercury and Yamaha. The plan was to retrofit Ficht's system onto existing two-strokes, promising cleaner combustion and slashed emissions. But the timeline wasn't driven by engineering. It was driven by fear. Engineers raised red flags from the start. Prototype Ficht engines failed durability tests, with power heads cracking under stress and injector bolts shearing off in the field. Manufacturing lines, split between aging plants in the US and new ones in Mexico, couldn't hold the tolerances Ficht demanded. Parts arrived out of spec, software glitches triggered runaway detonation, and early adopters found themselves stranded miles from shore. Internal memos warned of catastrophic failures, but management pushed the launch anyway, desperate to hit EPA deadlines and restore OMC's image. The fallout was immediate and brutal. By 1998, dealers were swamped with warranty returns. Some estimates put failure rates for early Ficht engines as high as 70 to 80%. U.S. Coast Guard and NHTSA recall bulletins covered entire production runs, over 15,000 units, demanding powerhead replacements or outright removal from service. Service bulletins stacked up, each one more urgent than the last. Replace pistons, swap out engine management modules, check every bolt. Mechanics scrambled to keep up, but the wave never broke. Customers lost faith, dealers lost patience, and OMC hemorrhaged cash. Warranty costs exploded, topping $100 million in just 3 years. In 1999 alone, the company's financial disclosures showed a $58.8 million spike in warranty accruals, nearly all tied to Ficht. Lawsuits and settlement claims piled up, but the real damage was to OMC's reputation. The Ficht disaster turned a technical gamble into a corporate death spiral. By December 2000, OMC was bankrupt, its assets up for grabs. Bombardier would soon take control, but the legend of Johnson, the brand that once defined reliability, was now tethered to the most expensive engineering failure the outboard world had ever seen. Bombardier Recreational Products entered the outboard market in 2001 with a single objective: stabilize what was left of OMC and survive the regulatory storm on the horizon. The logic was clinical. EPA Phase 2 emission standards, set to take effect in 2007, would slash allowable hydrocarbon and nitrogen oxide emissions to a fraction of previous limits. Two-stroke engines, even the best of Johnson's, were suddenly a liability. BRP's executive team, led by Jose Boisoli, saw the numbers. Retrofitting legacy Johnson designs for compliance would drain resources with little promise of success. Evinrude's new E-Tech technology, on the other hand, offered a path forward: direct injection two-strokes that could meet or exceed the EPA's benchmarks without sacrificing performance. Inside BRP's Montreal headquarters, 2006 meeting minutes summarized the calculus in stark terms. Every dollar spent maintaining two brands was a dollar not spent on E-Tech's development. Johnson and Evinrude, once rivals under OMC, now looked redundant in a world where only one could survive the transition to cleaner engines. Investor briefings that spring referenced brand rationalization and elimination of legacy duplication. The message was clear: consolidate engineering, streamline production, and channel all innovation into a single, emissions-compliant flagship. Dealers were not consulted. The strategy was top-down, driven by regulatory deadlines and the need to present a unified face to both the EPA and Wall Street. The July 2007 discontinuation memo was already drafted before most dealers heard a whisper of change. For BRP, the choice was not personal, it was survival. The outboard market was shrinking, the compliance window was closing, and in the boardroom, sentiment had no place on the balance sheet. The July 2007 bulletin landed with the blunt force of a betrayal. Dealers who had spent decades building their livelihoods around Johnson's promise opened their mail to find a single-page notice. Effective immediately, all Johnson Outboards were discontinued. Service agreements, parts contracts, and residual inventory support gone. The memo cited changing market requirements, but for the men and women on the showroom floor, it felt like a death sentence. One dealer in Minnesota, whose family had sold Johnson since 1958, described the moment as like losing a member of the family. Phones rang off the hook. Customers, some in tears, begged for answers. Would their engines still be supported? Could they get parts? Was their investment worthless overnight? Mechanics who had built reputations on Johnson reliability were left fielding questions they couldn't answer. In Wisconsin, a 30-year dealership closed its doors for good, a handwritten sign taped to the glass. BRP killed a legend, not just a motor. The emotional toll was not limited to the sales floor. Gary Garbrecht, Johnson's longtime chief designer and the last public face of the brand, retired quietly just weeks after the announcement. In interviews, he spoke of irreconcilable differences with new management, a code for the heartbreak of watching a legacy erased by spreadsheet logic. For dealers, mechanics, and loyalists, the end didn't come with fanfare or ceremony. It arrived as a form letter, unsigned and unmourned, leaving behind only memories and a sense that something irreplaceable had been taken. On the used market, Johnson Outboards became gold overnight. Engines that once sat unsold in dealership back rooms now commanded eye-watering sums. Late-model V6s, especially the Fast Strike and Ocean Pro, routinely changed hands for $5,000 to $8,000, sometimes more than their original sticker price. Auction listings from 2008 show bidding wars erupting over clean, low-hour examples, while collector forums tracked rare V8 300s reaching $15,000 at specialty sales. The economics were simple. When the supply vanished, demand only grew. Mechanics and small brokers stepped in, carving out a living as parts hunters and restoration specialists. Some built entire businesses sourcing original Johnson components, shipping rebuilt power heads and gear cases to customers as far away as Australia. Classified ads filled with pleas. Wanted, 2002 Ocean Pro must be complete, or paying top dollar for VRO fuel pumps. For many, the price was no obstacle. The legend of reliability had become a currency of its own, and the used market proved that a brand erased from the showroom could still rule the water, one transaction at a time. Collectors speak in quiet tones about Johnson Outboards, not as machines but as promises made in metal. Johnson wasn't just an engine, it was a promise, says one restorer, echoing a sentiment that lingers in marinas and online forums. Every rebuilt Fast Strike or Ocean Pro is a kind of defiance, a refusal to let the brand's memory be swept away by boardroom decisions or regulatory filings. The truth is, the story of Johnson's disappearance isn't fully written. Business schools now study its downfall as a lesson in what happens when corporate logic tramples loyalty, but the most important files remain sealed. Meeting minutes from Bombardier's 2006 executive sessions, where the future of Johnson was debated, are locked away, their contents left to speculation. In the absence of answers, a new kind of legacy has taken root. Collectors and mechanics have become the unofficial archivists, piecing together technical manuals, sourcing rare parts, and sharing survival guides in digital back channels. Each restored engine is a question left hanging in the air. What was lost when a brand built on reliability was erased by a line in a ledger? The files may never open, but the legend refuses to close. Johnson's legacy lives on, not just on the water, but in the hands of those who won't let the story die. In July 2007, a corporate bulletin confirmed what owners had feared. After 104 years, Johnson Outboards was officially discontinued. The documentary has traced how a brand built on die-cast aluminum innovation and a legacy of reliability, once selling over 1 million units by 1952, was ultimately undone by internal rivalry, the rushed Ficht injection gamble, and a final decision by BRP, yet some questions remain. No board minutes or executive statements have ever been released to fully explain the rationale behind Johnson's erasure, and key corporate files remain sealed. Today, late-model Johnson Outboards still command $5,000 to $8,000 at auction, and restoration forums remain active, testifying to an enduring loyalty. The story of Johnson Outboards is a cautionary tale of how innovation, corporate decisions, and market forces can erase even the most trusted names. What happened to Johnson is documented fact. Why it was allowed to disappear without accountability remains an open file.